They told him it was impossible. Every advisor, every ally, every foreign diplomat who stepped into his court whispered the same truth behind closed doors. You cannot win, not against them, not against Europe. And perhaps they were right to doubt. After all, by 1896, the world had learned a brutal lesson. When European armies arrived on African soil, kingdoms fell. Always. It did not matter how ancient your civilization was, how brave your warriors fought, or how righteous your cause seemed. The pattern was carved into the earth with blood and broken treaties. Resist, and you would be crushed. Submit, and you might survive as a puppet, your strings pulled from a distant capital where men drew lines across maps they had never walked. But Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia understood something those advisors did not, something those European generals marching toward his borders could not fathom. He understood that empires do not fall because of superior weapons, they fall because of superior thinking, and he had been thinking about this moment for 10 years. March 1st, 1896. 20,000 Italian soldiers, confident in their rifles and artillery, and the unshakable belief in European supremacy, march toward what they assume will be another easy colonial conquest, another flag planted. Another territory claimed, another line drawn on the map. They expect scattered resistance, primitive tactics, victory before lunch. Instead, they find 100,000 Ethiopian warriors waiting in perfect formation across the hills of Adwa. And at the center of this impossible army stands a man who has weaponized patience itself. By sunset, 6,000 Italians will be dead. The survivors will flee in disorder, abandoning weapons, wounded, dignity. Italy will suffer the most catastrophic military defeat any European power faces in Africa during the entire scramble for the continent. And the world will be forced to confront an uncomfortable truth it has spent decades trying to ignore. Africa can fight back. But here is what makes Adwa different from every other story of resistance you have heard. This was not luck. This was not a desperate last stand that happened to succeed. This was the result of a decade of strategic brilliance so sophisticated that historians are still studying it today. Menelik did not stumble into victory. He built it, brick by brick, alliance by alliance, weapon by weapon, carefully constructing a trap so perfect that when Italy finally walked into it, they never saw the walls closing until it was far too late. This is not just the story of a battle. This is the story of how one man turned everyone's assumptions into their greatest weakness, how he used Europe's arrogance as a weapon against them, how he proved that intelligence, preparation, and unity could defeat guns and artillery and all the industrial might of a colonial power. But to understand how Menelik achieved the impossible, we need to start where most stories end. We need to start with the moment when everything should have been over, but somehow was not. 1889. Emperor Johannes IV lies dead on a battlefield against Mahdist forces from Sudan. The throne of Ethiopia stands empty. Regional lords who have spent decades fighting each other for scraps of power suddenly face a choice. Unite behind a new emperor or watch the empire fragment into pieces, small enough for European powers to swallow one by one. This is the moment when Ethiopia should have fallen apart, when the careful balance holding the kingdom together should have collapsed, when Italy, watching from their coastal holdings in Eritrea, should have found their opening. Instead, something unexpected happens, something that will change everything. Menelik, the ruler of Shewa and one of the most powerful regional lords in Ethiopia, does not seize the throne through force. He does not march armies to the capital and demand recognition. He does something far more dangerous. He negotiates. He builds consensus. He convinces the other regional powers that their survival depends on accepting his leadership not because he is the strongest, but because he is the smartest. And they believe him, because by 1889, Menelik has already proven something crucial. He has transformed Shiwa from a struggling province into the most powerful and modern region in all of Ethiopia. While other lords clung to tradition, Menelik imported modern rifles. While others isolated themselves, Menelik built trade relationships. While others ignored the storm gathering across Africa, Menelik studied it. He watched ancient kingdoms in West Africa fall to French armies. He read reports of British conquest in the south. He learned about the Berlin Conference, where European powers sat in a room thousands of miles away and carved up an entire continent without inviting a single African voice. He understood the game being played. And unlike almost every other African leader of his era, he understood the rules. But understanding the game is not the same as winning it. And as Menelik takes the throne as Emperor of Ethiopia, King of Kings, elect of God, he knows that titles mean nothing if he cannot defend them. He needs weapons, he needs allies, he needs time. And that is when Italy makes its approach. The Italians see opportunity in a new emperor. Instability, weakness, a chance to secure control before Menelik consolidates power. They arrive with an offer that sounds reasonable on its surface. A treaty of friendship, trade agreements, diplomatic support, modern weapons, all in exchange for a few concessions, nothing major, just some clarity on borders. Some protocols for communication, simple things. Menelik, desperate for those weapons and that diplomatic recognition, agrees. On May 2nd, 1890, he signs the Treaty of Wuchale. Two versions are prepared, one in Italian, one in Amharic, Ethiopia's language. Both sides smile, both sides shake hands, both sides believe they have gotten exactly what they wanted. But only one side is telling the truth. Here is where the story becomes fascinating. Here is where we see the first glimpse of the trap Menelik is building, even though he does not realize it yet. Because hidden in the translation between those two versions of the treaty is a lie so subtle, so carefully crafted, that it will take years for Menelik to discover it, and when he does, it will change everything. Article 17. In the Amharic version, it says that Ethiopia may use Italian diplomatic channels if it wishes. May. Optional. A courtesy between friends. In the Italian version, it says Ethiopia will use Italian diplomatic channels. Must. Mandatory. Required. One word. That is all it takes. One carefully mistranslated word, and suddenly Ethiopia is not signing a friendship treaty, it is signing away its sovereignty. Because under international law in 1890, if a nation must conduct all foreign policy through another nation's channels, it is not independent. It is a protectorate, a colony by another name. Italy begins telling other European powers that Ethiopia has agreed to become Italian territory, that Ethiopia belongs to them now, that no other nation should recognize Ethiopian sovereignty or sell weapons to Ethiopian representatives. And Menelik, still believing he signed a friendship treaty, watches in growing horror as the walls close in. This is the moment that defines everything that follows, because Menelik has a choice. He can accept the deception. He can bow to Italy's interpretation and watch Ethiopia become another colored section on a European map. He can join the long list of African rulers who discovered too late that treaties with colonial powers are written in disappearing ink. Or he can fight. But here is what makes Menelik different. He does not choose immediately. He does not react in anger. He does not send armies rushing toward Italian positions in righteous fury. Instead, he does something that seems almost cowardly to those who do not understand what is happening. He waits. For 3 years, Menelik waits. He sends diplomatic letters explaining the discrepancy between the treaty versions. He appeals to European sense of justice. He offers compromises. He suggests renegotiations. And Italy refuses every single offer. They insist their version is correct. They insist Ethiopia must submit. And while Menelik waits, while he plays the patient diplomat, sending letters that go unanswered, he is doing something else. something brilliant, something Italy will not discover until it is far too late. He is preparing for war. Not just military preparation, though that is certainly happening. Menelik is buying weapons, thousands of modern rifles from France, artillery from Russia, ammunition from Swiss and Belgian dealers. He is exploiting European rivalries, playing Britain against France, against Italy, using their competition to arm Ethiopia to the teeth. But weapons are only one part of the equation. The harder part, the part that will actually determine whether Ethiopia survives, is unity. And unity is something Ethiopia has not truly achieved in living memory. Ethiopia in 1893 is not a unified nation. It is a collection of regions, each with its own ruler, culture, army, interests. The regional lords have spent generations competing with each other for power and resources. Getting them to cooperate against an external threat is like herding cats made of fire and pride. Menelik begins the slow, patient work of convincing these regional powers that their survival depends on standing together. He sends messengers. He makes political deals. He offers autonomy in exchange for military cooperation. He appeals to national pride and religious identity. And when persuasion does not work, he has a secret weapon. Her name is Empress Taitu Betul. Most stories about Adwa mention Taitu in passing, if at all. A wife, a supporter, a woman who happened to be present. But that understanding misses something fundamental. Taitu is not simply Menelik's partner. She is a political force who understands court intrigue and regional politics better than most men in the empire. She has family connections across multiple regions. She has influence. Menelik cannot command alone. More importantly, Taitu is a fierce nationalist who believes compromise with colonial powers always leads to subjugation. While some of Menelik's advisors counsel caution, Taitu argues for war. And she does not just argue, she acts. She travels personally to regions where lords are hesitating. She uses her connections and political skills to convince skeptical leaders that unity is their only path to survival. She organizes supply chains. She coordinates logistics. She helps move and feed the massive armies that will eventually converge on Adwa. This is not symbolic leadership. This is not a figurehead waving from a palace. Taitu is actively building the coalition that will save Ethiopia. And when the battle finally comes, she will be there on the field, directing supply lines and rallying warriors. But we are getting ahead of the story. Because in 1893, Menelik is still playing the diplomat, still sending letters, still waiting, and Italy is growing impatient. Italian politicians see a problem. They have staked their international reputation on controlling Ethiopia. If they back down now, they will be humiliated. The Italian press has spent years telling the public that Ethiopia is a primitive kingdom waiting to be civilized. The government needs a foreign victory to distract from domestic troubles. So Italy makes a decision that will doom 20,000 of their soldiers. They decide to force the issue. They begin pushing military forces south from Eritrea into Ethiopian territory. They capture border forts. They establish garrisons. They dare Menelik to respond. And Menelik, patient as ever, watches these provocations carefully. He knows what Italy wants. They want him to react hastily, to send poorly organized forces into battle before he is ready. They want him to be the angry African king, charging blindly at superior European discipline and firepower. So he does not give them what they want. He continues to wait. He continues to prepare. And every day he waits, his army grows stronger, his alliances grow deeper, his stockpiles grow larger. By late 1895, Menelik has achieved something that should be impossible. He has united Ethiopia's regional powers behind his leadership. He has assembled an arsenal of modern weapons that rivals what Italy possesses. He has established supply lines and communication networks. He has scouts monitoring every Italian movement. He has built his trap. Now all he needs is for Italy to walk into it. And Italy, confident in European superiority and blind to the possibility that an African kingdom could organize on this scale, does exactly that. September 1895, Menelik issues the call to arms. The message spreads across Ethiopia through church networks, regional proclamations, and messengers riding hard through mountain passes. And what follows is something European military observers will later struggle to explain, something that challenges every assumption about African military organization. From every corner of Ethiopia, armies begin to move, not scattered bands, not disorganized militias, coordinated regional forces with supply trains, equipment, and clear command structures. From Shewa come tens of thousands of warriors loyal to Menelik himself. From Tigray in the north, Ras Alula brings battle-hardened veterans who have fought Italians before and know their weaknesses. From Gojam, from Wollo, from regions across the empire, forces converge toward the north. This is not a desperate scramble. This is logistics. This is planning. This is proof that when Menelik spent 3 years appearing to do nothing while Italy insulted and provoked him, he was actually doing everything. But here is what makes this mobilization truly remarkable. Ethiopian warriors are not professional soldiers in the European sense. They are farmers, herders, craftsmen who take up arms when called. And yet they move with purpose and organization that rivals European armies. Because they have been preparing for this, training, drilling, understanding that when the call comes, their response must be immediate and overwhelming. By December 1895, Ethiopian forces begin concentrating near the border with Italian-occupied Eritrea. Conservative estimates put the number at 100,000 warriors. Some historians suggest the real number might be even higher. Think about that for a moment. 100,000 men, moving through mountainous terrain, coordinating movements across hundreds of miles, maintaining supply lines in hostile territory, keeping organization and discipline. This is not luck. This is not primitive warfare. This is military sophistication that European observers refuse to acknowledge, because acknowledging it would mean admitting that African kingdoms can organize on a scale that rivals European powers. Meanwhile, in Eritrea, General Oreste Baratieri is growing concerned. Italian intelligence reports are landing on his desk, and the numbers do not make sense. 100,000? That cannot be right. African armies do not mobilize on that scale. They do not maintain that kind of organization. The scouts must be exaggerating, seeing every shepherd and farmer and counting them as soldiers. But the reports keep coming, and they are consistent. And Baratieri, veteran colonial officer that he is, begins to realize that something is very wrong with the assumptions he has been making. His forces are stretched thin across occupied territories. Supply lines from Italy are long and growing more unreliable. His troops, who expected easy victory against disorganized resistance, are becoming demoralized as they hear stories about the massive Ethiopian buildup. Morale is cracking. And then the pressure from Rome starts. Prime Minister Francesco Crispi does not want excuses. He does not want caution. He does not want reports about supply problems or troop morale or unexpected Ethiopian organization. He wants victory. The Italian press is criticizing Baratieri for being too passive. The Italian public expects quick, decisive conquest. Political rivals are questioning why Italy's colonial venture has not yet succeeded when Britain and France seem to carve up territories with ease. Baratieri wants to wait. He wants to build up his forces. He wants to let Ethiopian logistics collapse under their own weight, because surely feeding 100,000 men in the field cannot be sustainable. Time, he believes, is on his side. But time is the one thing Rome will not give him. December 1895. Ethiopian forces, done waiting, take the offensive. They attack Alaji, a strategic mountain fortress where Italians have established a garrison. The fort is isolated, surrounded by Ethiopian forces who cut off all supply and reinforcement. The Italian garrison holds out for weeks, expecting relief that never comes. Finally, on December 7th, they surrender. Major Pietro Toselli, the Italian commander, dies in the final assault. Over 2,000 Italian and Eritrean troops become prisoners. When news reaches Rome, there is shock, disbelief. European armies do not surrender to African forces. This must be some kind of mistake, some communication error. Surely the situation cannot be as bad as reported. But it is. And Menelik is not finished. January 1896, Ethiopian forces attack Mekele, another fortified Italian position. For 2 weeks, Ethiopian artillery pounds Italian defenses while warriors cut off water supplies. The garrison commander, Major Giuseppe Galliano, watches his men dying of thirst and running out of ammunition. He sends desperate messages to Baratieri, begging for relief. Baratieri tries. He genuinely tries to break through and rescue the garrison, but Ethiopian forces block every approach. They have chosen this ground carefully. They understand the terrain. They know where Italian relief columns will try to advance, and they are waiting. On January 21st, with no options left, Galliano surrenders, and here Menelik does something brilliant. Something that shows he is not just thinking about winning battles, but about winning the war that comes after. He lets them go. He allows the defeated Italian soldiers to retreat to Eritrea on one condition: they must leave all weapons and equipment behind. No rifles, no ammunition, no artillery. Walk back to your lines and tell everyone what you saw here. The defeated Italian soldiers march back to Eritrea, carrying stories that spread like poison through Baratieri's army. They talk about massive Ethiopian forces, coordinated tactics, effective artillery. An enemy that fights with discipline and courage. An enemy that is not supposed to exist according to everything European military doctrine says about African warfare. Baratieri's position becomes impossible. He has lost 2 major garrisons without inflicting serious damage on Ethiopian forces. His troops are terrified. Supply problems are worsening. And then, on February 8, 1896, he receives a telegram from Prime Minister Crispi that ends any possibility of caution. Win a decisive victory immediately, or you will be replaced. Baratieri understands what this means. His career depends on victory. His reputation depends on victory. His honor, by the twisted logic of military culture, depends on victory. He cannot wait any longer. He cannot build up his forces. He cannot choose the time and place of battle. He must attack, now, whether ready or not, whether the situation favors him or not, whether his intelligence says it is wise or not. So he makes the decision that will kill thousands of his soldiers. He will advance south with his entire available force. He will seek decisive battle with the main Ethiopian army. He will use superior Italian firepower and European discipline to break Ethiopian resistance once and for all. He assembles approximately 20,000 troops. About 15,000 are Italian soldiers. The remainder are Eritrean askari, local soldiers fighting for colonial masters they do not love, for reasons they are not entirely sure of anymore. He brings artillery batteries, machine guns, substantial ammunition reserves. On paper, it is a formidable force. On paper, European firepower should overcome Ethiopian numbers. But paper does not fight battles. And Baratieri is about to learn what happens when assumptions meet reality. His plan is ambitious. He will march at night to achieve surprise and avoid daytime heat. He divides his force into 4 brigade-sized columns, each following separate mountain paths that should converge near the town of Adwa at dawn. If everything goes according to plan, Italian forces will catch Ethiopian armies separated and destroy them piece by piece before they can coordinate. It is the kind of plan that looks brilliant when drawn on a map in a comfortable headquarters. Complex, sophisticated, the sort of thing that impresses other officers. It has one small problem. The maps are wrong. Italian cartographers have poorly surveyed the mountain passes around Adwa. The terrain is more difficult than their maps indicate. The paths do not connect the way their maps suggest. Distances are greater than calculated. What should take hours will take much longer. And Menelik knows this. Because Ethiopian scouts have been shadowing Italian positions for weeks, they understand this terrain perfectly because they were born in it, raised in it, fought in it. Every valley, every pass, every ridge is familiar ground. When Italian columns begin their night march on February 29, 1896, Ethiopian scouts track their every movement. Runners race back to Menelik's headquarters, updating him constantly on Italian positions, speed, organization. Menelik is not surprised by the Italian advance. He is ready for it. He has positioned his forces across the hills and valleys surrounding Adwa in a massive crescent formation. Ethiopian armies occupy high ground with commanding views of every approach. Artillery is positioned where it can devastate Italian columns as they advance. Cavalry units wait to exploit any weakness. Everything Menelik has built over 10 years of patient preparation is about to be tested. Every weapon purchased, every alliance forged, every supply line established, every scout trained. Every warrior who believed in Ethiopian independence enough to march hundreds of miles and wait in these hills for battle. As dawn breaks on March 1, 1896, the Italian columns are scattered across difficult terrain. They have marched all night through unfamiliar mountain passes. They are tired, strung out, no longer in tight formation. Communication between columns is difficult to impossible. And that is when Italian officers see what awaits them. Across the hills surrounding Adwa, as far as the eye can see, stand Ethiopian forces in organized formations, tens of thousands of warriors ready for battle. Artillery positioned on high ground, cavalry waiting to charge. There is a moment, one terrible moment of realization that must have passed through every Italian officer simultaneously, the moment when they understand that they are not catching an unprepared enemy by surprise. The moment when they realize they have walked into a prepared defensive position held by a force that outnumbers them 5-1. The moment when they understand that someone has been smarter than them, that someone has planned better, that someone has turned all their assumptions into weapons against them, but it is too late to retreat. The columns are separated by terrain. Going backward is as dangerous as going forward, and Italian military culture does not allow for retreat before battle is even joined. To turn back now would be to admit fear, to acknowledge that African warriors have outthought European officers. So they advance. Because what else can they do? They have marched all night. They are committed. Retreat is unthinkable. Victory, surely, is still possible. They have modern rifles. They have artillery. They have European training and discipline. What they do not have is any realistic understanding of what they are about to face. The first shots ring out around 5:30 in the morning. Italian advance guards make contact with Ethiopian forward positions. And within minutes, Baratieri's carefully planned 4-column advance collapses into chaos. The rightmost Italian column under General Vittorio d'Abomeda is furthest from the other Italian forces. He is moving through a valley with Ethiopian forces on surrounding heights. This is not the position he thought he would be in. The map said this valley would provide cover and concealment for a flanking movement. The maps lied. In the center, brigades under Generals Matteo Albertone and Giuseppe Arimondi are encountering the main Ethiopian positions. They are taking fire from multiple directions as Ethiopian forces on high ground pour rifle fire into Italian columns. The leftmost column under General Giuseppe Elena is struggling to advance through terrain that is worse than anticipated while under constant harassment from Ethiopian skirmishers who appear, fire, and disappear into terrain they know intimately. Baratieri, positioned with reserve forces, tries to coordinate his scattered brigades, But communication is nearly impossible. Runners cannot move quickly through mountainous terrain under fire. Visual signals are blocked by hills and valleys. His carefully planned coordination is falling apart before the battle has truly begun. His 4 columns are not fighting one coordinated battle, they are fighting 4 separate battles. And in each battle, they are outnumbered, outpositioned, and facing an enemy that is not behaving according to European assumptions about African warfare. Menelik, positioned on high ground near the center of Ethiopian forces, has clear visibility of most of the battlefield. He has coordinated with his regional commanders beforehand. Each knows their role. The battle plan is sophisticated in its simplicity. Hold the high ground, use superior numbers to envelop Italian columns, preserve ammunition by choosing targets carefully, use cavalry to exploit breakthroughs and cut off retreating units. This is not primitive warfare. This is combined arms coordination. This is tactics that would impress European military academies if those academies were willing to admit that African commanders could think on this level. General Albertone's brigade, advancing in the center, runs directly into the main Ethiopian position held by forces under Ras Alula and other Tigrayan warriors. These are veterans who have fought Italians before at Dogali years earlier. They know Italian tactics, they understand how European armies fight, and they have prepared to counter every advantage Italians think they possess. Ethiopian artillery opens fire. Shells land among Italian formations with devastating accuracy. Italian soldiers are shocked. They assumed Ethiopian artillery would be poorly trained, ineffective, mostly for show. Instead, they are under bombardment that matches anything European armies could deliver. Albertone's brigade begins taking heavy casualties. Italian soldiers are trained to fight in tight formations, delivering coordinated volley fire. But Ethiopian forces are using terrain fluidly, advancing and retreating in ways that make Italian formations vulnerable to enfilading fire from multiple directions. Around 6:30 in the morning, less than an hour into the battle, Albertone realizes his brigade is in danger of being surrounded. He tries to pull back to more defensible positions, but the retreat becomes disorganized. Italian units lose cohesion, and that is when Ethiopian cavalry charges. Thousands of horsemen waiting for exactly this moment crash into Italian formations that are already wavering. Warriors armed with swords and spears close the distance before Italian rifles can stop them. The fighting becomes hand-to-hand, brutal, chaotic, terrifying. Italian soldiers trained to shoot at distant targets suddenly find themselves in close combat with Ethiopian warriors who have trained with blades from childhood. It is not the kind of fighting European military doctrine prepares soldiers for. It is not clean. It is not distant. It is personal and savage and overwhelming. Albertone's brigade begins to collapse. Within 2 hours of first contact, thousands of Italian soldiers are dead, wounded, or fleeing in panic. Albertone himself is captured along with many of his officers. The Italian center has effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. But the battle is far from over, and what happens next will be even worse for Italy. While Albertone's brigade disintegrates in the center, General Dabormida's column on the Italian right is marching deeper into catastrophe. He has poor visibility. His maps are worse than useless. He believes he is moving to envelope the Ethiopian left flank and attack from an unexpected direction. Strategic brilliance, classic military maneuver. In reality, he is marching his entire brigade into a valley, surrounded on 3 sides by Ethiopian forces who have been waiting for exactly this mistake. Ethiopian regional armies, under Ras Mekele of Wollo and other commanders, watch in something close to disbelief as 4,000 Italian soldiers walk directly into the trap. They hold their fire, waiting, letting the Italians march deeper, letting them commit fully to terrain they cannot escape. When Dabormida finally realizes his situation around 9 in the morning, Ethiopian forces open fire from 3 directions simultaneously. His brigade is caught in a devastating crossfire. Artillery shells rain down from heights he cannot reach. Rifle fire tears through his formations from angles he cannot defend against. His own artillery, which should provide covering fire, is overwhelmed within minutes. Debormida tries to fight his way out, but there is no good direction to retreat. Ethiopian forces block every escape route. They are not fighting like the disorganized rabble Italian military intelligence promised. They are fighting with coordination and discipline that suggests careful planning. They are fighting like soldiers who know exactly what they are doing. The situation degenerates from battle into massacre. Italian soldiers fight in small groups, trying desperately to find cover in terrain that offers none. Ethiopian warriors advance steadily, maintaining fire discipline, using their overwhelming numbers to envelope and isolate Italian units that are already breaking apart. Officers try to rally their men, try to maintain some kind of defensive perimeter. But leadership means nothing when your soldiers are dying faster than you can give orders, when every direction looks like death. When the promise of European invincibility turns out to be a lie written in your comrade's blood. By 10 in the morning, Debormida's brigade has been effectively annihilated. General Debormida himself dies in the fighting. Whether he falls in combat or takes his own life to avoid capture remains disputed, and in the chaos of that valley, it hardly matters. Of the 4,000 men in his brigade, fewer than 200 will escape back to Eritrea. The rest are dead, wounded, or captured. An entire brigade, gone, erased from the battlefield in less than 4 hours. News of Debormida's destruction reaches other Italian commanders in fragments, contradictory reports, rumors spreading faster than facts, but the message is clear enough. The right flank is gone. Albertone's center is collapsing. Only Arimondi's brigade and Elena's column remain as coherent fighting forces, and they are both under enormous pressure. General Arimondi, commanding forces in the center-left, is fighting desperately to maintain any kind of defensive position. After Albertone's collapse, Arimondi faces the full weight of Menelik's central forces, wave after wave of Ethiopian warriors pressing forward. Artillery fire from positions he cannot reach. The steady, methodical destruction of everything he thought he understood about warfare. Empress Taitu is personally present in this sector, not watching from a safe distance, not providing symbolic support. She is coordinating supply lines, ensuring ammunition reaches Ethiopian forces, directing movement of reserves to exploit weaknesses in the Italian line. Contemporary accounts from Italian prisoners will later describe seeing her on the battlefield, rallying troops, directing movements. A woman commanding armies in a way that Victorian European culture cannot comprehend or explain. Arimondi's men fight with courage. They maintain disciplined volley fire, even as Ethiopian forces press from multiple sides. Italian artillery does good work, temporarily checking Ethiopian advances with devastating shell fire. For brief moments, it seems like Italian discipline and firepower might hold the line. But courage and discipline cannot overcome mathematics. Arimondi is outnumbered. His flanks are exposed with Albertone captured and Debormida destroyed. His ammunition is running low. His men are exhausted from marching all night and fighting all morning. And Ethiopian forces just keep coming. Around 11 in the morning, Ethiopian forces make a major coordinated push against Arimondi's position. Not a wild charge, not a disorganized mob. A carefully timed assault from multiple directions designed to break the Italian defensive line at its weakest points. Thousands of warriors advance simultaneously, some with rifles, some with traditional weapons, all with the determination of men fighting to prevent their nation from becoming another European colony. The Italian line wavers. Officers shout orders trying to maintain cohesion. Sergeants fire into the advancing Ethiopians. Soldiers reload and fire until their hands bleed from the friction of hot metal. And then the line breaks. Not everywhere at once, in one section first, then another. Like ice cracking on a frozen lake, the fractures spreading faster than anyone can contain. Italian soldiers who have held position for hours suddenly find themselves surrounded, cut off, facing death from directions they thought were secure. General Arimondi, trying desperately to rally his men and restore the defensive line, is killed in the fighting. The exact circumstances of his death vary depending on who tells the story, but the result is the same: another Italian general dead, another senior officer lost. Another symbol of European military superiority bleeding out in African soil. With Arimondi dead and the center broken, his brigade begins a fighting retreat that quickly becomes a rout. Organization collapses, units lose cohesion, soldiers throw away their equipment to run faster. Officers lose control of their men, the retreat becomes survival, individual soldiers fleeing in whatever direction seems least deadly. Ethiopian cavalry, waiting for exactly this moment, charges into the retreating Italians. Horsemen cutting down fleeing men. Not because of cruelty, not because of bloodlust, but because in the brutal calculus of warfare, you do not let broken armies retreat intact to regroup and fight again. You press the advantage. You destroy the enemy's ability to resist. The retreat becomes a massacre. Italian soldiers who fled thinking they could reach safety find Ethiopian cavalry blocking their path. Men who thought they could outrun pursuit discover that Ethiopian horses are faster and Ethiopian riders know this terrain better. Groups of soldiers trying to maintain some defensive cohesion find themselves surrounded and overwhelmed. Only General Elena's brigade on the Italian left remains relatively intact, and Elena, watching the disaster unfolding across the battlefield, makes the only rational decision available. He orders immediate retreat before his brigade suffers the same fate as the others. His forces pull back in relatively good order, maintaining discipline, covering each other's withdrawal. It is the right decision, the only decision, but it means abandoning whatever remains of Albertone's, Dabormida's, and Arimondi's brigades to their fates. It means accepting that the battle is lost, that the invasion has failed, that Italian colonial ambitions in Ethiopia have been decisively, catastrophically crushed. By noon, the Battle of Adwa is effectively over. The Italian army has been shattered. Thousands of Italian soldiers lie dead on the battlefield. Thousands more are wounded, captured, or fleeing in complete disorder back toward Eritrea. Baratieri, watching the destruction of his army from positions where he cannot effectively intervene, has no choice but to order general retreat with whatever forces remain capable of organized movement. His career is over. His army is destroyed. And Italy's colonial ambitions in Ethiopia have run into a reality that European powers have spent decades denying was possible. African armies, properly organized and equipped and led, can defeat European forces. Not through luck, not through European incompetence alone, but through superior strategy, better use of terrain, and the kind of military sophistication that European military doctrine insists Africans are incapable of achieving. The battlefield after Adwa is chaos. Dead and wounded from both sides cover the ground. Ethiopian casualties are significant. Estimates range from 7,000 to 10,000 killed and wounded. It is a heavy price, a terrible price, but in proportion to their total forces and measured against what they have achieved, it is sustainable. Italian casualties are catastrophic. Approximately 6,000 Italian and Eritrean soldiers are dead. Another 1,500 are wounded. Nearly 3,000 are captured. For a European army, these numbers are not just losses, they are annihilation. Entire regiments have ceased to exist. Multiple general officers are dead or captured. The Italian command structure in East Africa has effectively been decapitated. But Menelik faces an immediate crisis that could undermine everything he has achieved. What to do with 3,000 prisoners? Feeding them, guarding them, transporting them through territory where supply lines are already stretched thin presents an enormous logistical burden. Ethiopian forces are exhausted from battle and low on supplies themselves. There is pressure from some quarters to execute the prisoners. In Ethiopian military tradition, captured enemies are sometimes killed to prevent them from returning to fight again. Some commanders argue that showing mercy to colonial invaders will be interpreted as weakness, that it will encourage future European aggression. But Menelik understands something crucial, something that separates him from generals who only think about the battle in front of them. He understands that the world is watching, that European powers are waiting to see how Ethiopia treats white prisoners, that any atrocity, any mass execution will give those powers moral justification to intervene on Italy's behalf. That defeating Italy militarily means nothing if it creates pretext for Britain or France or Germany to send their armies claiming to rescue their fellow Europeans from barbarism. So Menelik makes a decision that is controversial within his own ranks, but strategically brilliant on the international stage. He will treat the Italian prisoners humanely. They will be given food and medical attention. Wounded prisoners will receive care from Ethiopian medical personnel. Officers will be allowed to keep their personal possessions. They will be marched back to Addis Ababa and eventually ransomed back to Italy in exchange for formal recognition of Ethiopian sovereignty. However, there is one exception that shocks European observers when they learn of it. Eritrean askari who fought for Italy are treated harshly. Ethiopian tradition views them as traitors. Africans who fought for colonial masters against their own people. Many are mutilated as punishment, a practice that horrifies Europeans but fits Ethiopian military customs for dealing with those who betray their own. This distinction is important to Menelik. He wants to send a clear message. Europeans who fight will be treated according to international norms of warfare. Africans who collaborate with colonizers will face traditional justice. It is both a strategic calculation and a statement about loyalty, identity, and the consequences of choosing foreign masters over African solidarity. Over the following weeks, Italian prisoners are marched to Addis Ababa. The journey is difficult. Many suffer from wounds, disease, exhaustion, but most survive, which is more than can be said for what might have happened if Ethiopian commanders had been given free rein to dispense traditional justice. Meanwhile, news of the Italian defeat spreads across the world like wildfire. Telegraph lines carry the story to every capital in Europe. Newspapers print special editions. People gather in cafes and parlors and public squares, trying to make sense of information that contradicts everything they thought they knew about the natural order of things. In Italy, the reaction is devastation. The government collapses. Prime Minister Crispi, who demanded immediate victory and got immediate catastrophe instead, resigns in disgrace. There are riots in some Italian cities as the public realizes their sons have died in a colonial disaster that never should have happened. The Italian Chamber of Deputies holds angry debates where politicians blame each other for the humiliation. King Umberto, whose approval made the war possible, faces public criticism for the first time in his reign. The disaster at Adwa will haunt Italian politics for decades. It will fester in the national consciousness. It will become the wound that never fully heals, the humiliation that demands revenge, the reason why 40 years later Mussolini will launch another invasion, seeking to erase the shame of 1896. But we are getting ahead of the story again, because before we can understand what Adwa means for the future, we need to understand what it meant in that moment. And if you are still with us, if you have followed this story through 2 hours of history that most textbooks ignore, then you understand why Mementos Historians exists, to tell the stories that deserve to be told, to explore the moments when everything changed, to remember the victories that proved the impossible was possible. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this, because we are not done with Adwa yet. We still need to understand what happened next. How Menelik turned military victory into diplomatic recognition. how Ethiopia secured its independence permanently, and why this battle matters more than almost anyone realizes. When news reaches European capitals that Italy has suffered catastrophic defeat at Adwa, the initial reaction is disbelief. Newspapers report it as a minor setback. Surely the telegrams are confused. Surely African forces could not actually defeat a modern European army in open battle. These things do not happen. The natural order of the world does not work this way. But as Italian survivors stagger back to Eritrea and telegraph lines carry their accounts to Rome, the truth becomes undeniable. And the truth is uncomfortable for everyone who has built careers and fortunes on the assumption of European military invincibility. In Britain and France, while officially expressing sympathy to Italy, there is private satisfaction. Italy's failure means less competition in the colonial scramble for Africa. British and French officials take quiet pleasure in seeing an upstart rival humiliated. Their newspapers run stories analyzing Italian incompetence rather than Ethiopian competence. It is easier to explain the result as Italian failure than as African success. Germany's response is more strategic. Kaiser Wilhelm II's government views Adwa as a lesson. African kingdoms with modern weapons and organization can resist European conquest. Future colonial campaigns must be planned more carefully with overwhelming force and better intelligence. Russia celebrates openly. As fellow Orthodox Christians, Russians see Ethiopian victory as proof that faith and courage can overcome Catholic imperialism. Russian newspapers praise Ethiopian bravery and Christian solidarity. But the most profound reactions happen outside Europe. In colonized and threatened territories across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, Adwa proves something revolutionary. European military superiority is not inevitable. Colored soldiers can defeat white armies. Modern weapons in competent hands can overcome colonial forces. In Haiti, the world's first black republic, born from successful slave revolution, newspapers celebrate Adwa as proof of black military capability. Haitian intellectuals write essays connecting Ethiopian resistance to Haiti's own successful revolution against France a century earlier. In India, nationalist leaders study accounts of the battle. If Ethiopia can resist colonization through unity and organization, perhaps India can do the same. The Battle of Adwa becomes a subject of analysis in early Indian nationalist circles. The strategy, the logistics, the proof that European empires can be challenged successfully. In the Caribbean and Americas, African diaspora communities celebrate Adwa as a source of pride and inspiration. Ethiopia, the last major independent African kingdom, has proven that Africa can resist Europe, that African people can organize, fight, win. Marcus Garvey, the influential Pan-African leader who will emerge decades later, will cite Adwa as inspiration for his Back to Africa movement. The battle becomes a symbol of African resistance and capability woven into the fabric of Pan-African consciousness. W.E. B. Du Bois, the great African-American scholar and activist, writes extensively about Adwa's significance. He argues that the battle should be studied alongside other great military victories in world history, not treated as a curious anomaly, not dismissed as Italian incompetence, but recognized as a turning point in the relationship between Europe and the rest of the world. Because Adwa proves something that colonial ideology desperately needs people not to believe, that the colonized can defeat colonizers, that technology matters less than organization, that European conquest of non-European peoples is not destiny written in the stars, but the result of specific circumstances that can be challenged and overcome. But beyond symbolic importance, Adwa has immediate, practical consequences that will shape the next century. With his army shattered, Baratieri has no choice but to accept Ethiopian terms. Italy's new government, desperate to end the disaster and salvage what remains of Italian credibility, sends envoys to Menelik to negotiate peace. The negotiations culminate in the Treaty of Addis Ababa, signed on October 26, 1896, and the terms of this treaty represent something extraordinary, a complete Ethiopian victory. Italy formally recognizes Ethiopian sovereignty and independence. The Treaty of Wuchale, with its deceptive translation, is officially annulled. Italy acknowledges that Ethiopia is not and has never been an Italian protectorate. The border between Ethiopia and Italian Eritrea is clearly defined, with Italy retaining only its original coastal territories but abandoning all claims to Ethiopian land. Italy agrees to pay war reparations, not in direct payment, but through the ransom of prisoners and the costs of their maintenance during captivity. Most significantly, the treaty is signed as an agreement between equals. Italy does not impose terms. Ethiopia does not submit. It is a negotiated peace between sovereign powers. For the first time in the modern colonial era, an African nation has forced a European power to recognize its independence through military victory. Menelik has achieved something that should be impossible according to the logic of 1896. He has fundamentally altered the international legal status of Ethiopia. No European power can now claim Ethiopia as colonial territory without violating internationally recognized treaty agreements. But Menelik understands that military victory alone does not guarantee long-term security. He must consolidate Ethiopia's position diplomatically and economically. In the years following Adwa, Menelik pursues an aggressive modernization program designed to ensure Ethiopia can maintain its independence permanently. He establishes formal diplomatic relations with major powers. Ethiopian embassies open in European capitals. Foreign ambassadors establish residences in Addis Ababa. Ethiopia becomes a recognized member of the international community in ways that would have been unthinkable before Adwa. Menelik invites foreign investment and expertise, but crucially, on Ethiopian terms. European and American engineers help build infrastructure, roads, bridges, telegraph lines. But they work for the Ethiopian government, not foreign corporations extracting resources for distant shareholders. A railway line is constructed connecting Addis Ababa to the port of Djibouti, giving Ethiopia access to international trade without depending on Italian-controlled Eritrea. It is a massive undertaking that takes years to complete but proves economically transformative. Menelik establishes Ethiopia's first modern schools, incorporating both traditional Ethiopian education and Western subjects like mathematics, science, and foreign languages. He understands that maintaining independence requires not just military strength, but educational and technological development. The Ethiopian army is reorganized along more modern lines while maintaining its traditional warrior culture. Officers receive training in contemporary military tactics. New weapons are continuously purchased from multiple suppliers to avoid dependence on any single foreign power. Empress Taitu continues playing a significant role in governance. She influences policy decisions. She manages court politics. She represents Ethiopian interests in diplomatic functions. When foreign dignitaries visit Addis Ababa, they are often surprised to find themselves negotiating with both emperor and empress, rather than with Menelik alone. Taitu establishes schools, supports the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and works to improve infrastructure. Her influence continues even as Menelik's health begins declining in the early 1900s. The price of victory, however, extends beyond the battlefield. In the early 1900s, Menelik's health begins deteriorating. He suffers strokes starting around 1906 that progressively impair his physical and mental capabilities. Ethiopian court politics become increasingly complex as various factions position themselves for succession. Menelik has no surviving sons from his marriage to Taitu. His designated heir is his grandson Lij Iyasu, a young man whose temperament and reliability concern many court officials. Taitu attempts to maintain stability and protect her husband's legacy, but she faces opposition from regional leaders and court factions who see the emperor's illness as opportunity. The period from 1906 to Menelik's death in 1913 is one of increasing uncertainty. Menelik appears in public less frequently. When he does, his diminished capacity is obvious. Yet the empire he built remains stable, testament to the institutions and alliances he created. Taitu acts as regent for much of this period, though her authority is constantly challenged. In 1910, a palace coup forces her into retirement. Other officials take control of the government, ruling in Menelik's name while the emperor remains incapacitated. Menelik II dies on December 12, 1913, at approximately 69 years old. His death marks the end of an era. He is succeeded by Alaji Iyasu, whose controversial reign lasts only 3 years before he is deposed. Taitu lives until 1918, dying during the worldwide influenza pandemic. She never regains the power she held during Menelik's healthy years, but she remains a respected figure in Ethiopian society until her death. The succession struggles that follow Menelik's death eventually lead to the rise of Haile Selassie, a young noble who becomes regent in 1916 and emperor in 1930. Haile Selassie will face his own challenges when Italy returns in 1935, seeking revenge for Adwa. But that invasion, while temporarily successful due to overwhelming force and use of poison gas, will also ultimately fail. Ethiopian resistance continues throughout the 5-year occupation. And when British forces invade Italian East Africa during World War II with Ethiopian resistance fighters supporting them, Haile Selassie returns triumphantly on May 5, 1941, exactly 5 years after the Italian conquest. So in the end, Italy gets 45 years of revenge, but Ethiopia gets the final word. The 1935 to 1941 period is a dark chapter, but it reinforces an important point. Adwa was not luck. Ethiopian resistance, even against overwhelming odds, reflects a deep national commitment to independence that survives temporary defeats. Beyond immediate historical consequences, the Battle of Adwa becomes a powerful symbol that resonates across decades and continents. For Pan-Africanists, throughout the 20th century, Adwa represents proof that African people can organize, resist, and defeat colonialism. When African nations begin gaining independence in the 1950s and 60s, many nationalist leaders cite Adwa as inspiration. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. These and other African leaders reference Ethiopian resistance as proof that independence is achievable. The Ethiopian flag's colors, green, yellow, and red, are adopted by multiple African nations as symbols of Pan-African solidarity and resistance to colonialism. These colors appear on flags across the continent. Reggae music and Rastafarianism, emerging from Jamaica in the early 20th century, incorporate Ethiopian symbolism extensively. Rastafarians view Ethiopia as the promised land and Haile Selassie as a messianic figure, partly because Ethiopia's resistance at Adwa proved black people could defeat white colonial powers. The battle is commemorated annually in Ethiopia and among Ethiopian diaspora communities worldwide. March 1st is Victory of Adwa Day, a national holiday celebrating not just military victory, but national pride and African resistance. So what can we learn from a battle fought over a century ago? What does Adwa teach us that matters today? First, that preparation defeats improvisation. Menelik spent 10 years preparing for the confrontation with Italy. He stockpiled weapons, built alliances, studied enemy tactics, planned logistics. When battle came, Ethiopia was ready. Leaders who react to crises without preparation usually lose. Second, that unity is strength. Ethiopia succeeded because Menelik convinced diverse regions with different interests to coordinate under common cause. Division invites conquest. Unity enables resistance. This lesson applies throughout history to every liberation movement that has ever succeeded. Third, that assumptions are weapons that can be turned against those who hold them. Italy assumed African armies could not organize on a large scale. They assumed Ethiopian forces would be poorly equipped and trained. They assumed European superiority was natural law. Menelik turned every one of those assumptions into a trap that crushed Italian forces. Fourth, that morale matters as much as material. Ethiopian warriors fought for their homes, their independence, their identity. They were defending everything they valued. That motivation translated into determination on the battlefield that Italian soldiers, fighting for colonial glory they did not believe in, could not match. Fifth, that timing is everything. Menelik fought when he was ready, not when provoked. His patience meant battle happened on his terms, at the place of his choosing, when Ethiopian forces were at maximum strength and Italian forces were at maximum vulnerability. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Adwa teaches that colonialism was never inevitable. Europeans did not conquer Africa because of racial superiority or unstoppable technological advantage. They conquered through specific circumstances: disease, division among African peoples, incremental encroachment, superior organization in particular contexts. When Africans matched European organization, acquired comparable weapons, and fought united, they could win. Adwa proves it absolutely. This does not diminish other African resistance movements that failed despite equal courage and determination. They faced different circumstances, often longer odds, sometimes overwhelming force. But Adwa shows what was possible. What could be achieved when preparation met unity, when leadership was brilliant, when timing was right. March 1st, 1896, 100,000 Ethiopian warriors stand ready on the hills around Adwa. They face a European army that expects easy victory. By sunset, that Italian army is destroyed. 6,000 dead, thousands captured, the survivors fleeing in disorder. But Adwa is more than casualties and tactics. It is Emperor Menelik II who spent 10 years preparing for this moment. It is Empress Taitu Betul, whose political intelligence helped unite Ethiopia when others counseled submission. It is Ras Alula, Ras Mekele, and other commanders who led their warriors with skill and courage. It is 100,000 individual warriors who believed they fought for something larger than themselves. It is every Ethiopian who looked at encroaching colonialism and said, "No, not here, not us, not ever." Adwa is proof that history is made by human choices, that outcomes are not predetermined, that courage combined with intelligence can overcome what seems inevitable, that the colonized can defeat colonizers when they refuse to accept the script written for them. And that is why Adwa matters, why it deserves to be studied and remembered and celebrated, not just as an interesting historical anomaly, not just as Italian incompetence, but as a moment when everything the colonial powers believed about themselves and about Africa was proven wrong on a battlefield where assumptions went to die. Ethiopia won, Africa resisted, the impossible became real, and the world was forced to acknowledge a truth it had spent decades denying, that African people properly organized and led, fighting for their own freedom, are a force that cannot be broken. That is the story of Adwa, the day Africa proved it could not be conquered, the victory that changed history, the battle that made the impossible real.